I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP. And first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video will be on cognitive ability. And the reason I choose to talk about this is because I see it so much in the establishment of egalitarian culture that we currently have within America in the Western sphere, that we do have such a resentful position and disgusted attitude towards the idea of innate cognitive abilities, primarily general intelligence. And there have been several models which I've talked about, most primarily that have been presented by, I will call them theoreticians, but most notably the one that gets the bane of that hits the bane of my existence is multiple intelligence theory. But I noticed that there are several problematic assumptions that any person makes whenever they assume that intelligence is not a singular phenomenon. I can't say that IQ necessarily measures it perfectly, but I can say that if you think that there's no such thing as general intelligence, that you're not paying attention to reality. And the quote that a lot of individuals like to turn to is I don't know if Einstein actually said this, but it's often cited that Einstein says that you cannot, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, you'll miss its actual significance, or you'll miss what's actually valuable about it. And I would say that that's true, but there's too great of a leap that people take with that quote, and they assume that IQ tests or that psychometric batteries that stress for intelligence are testing people on anything that's not innate to their existence. That's the problem. Because what Einstein is saying is that a fish does not have the apparatus to climb. It doesn't have the natural capabilities to climb a tree. So why would you judge it in that category or under that domain? But to tell me that a human being does not have the apparatuses for reasoning, for judgment, and for receiving and differentiating information in an environment and acting on it according to their best benefit, then you don't really think about what it is you are presenting to the world, or the positions and factors of truth when it comes to cognitive ability and one's ability to get on in the world. And I'll say it like this: there is an evolutionary mandate, or there's an evolutionary necessity for general intelligence that no person can argue or explain away. There are two aspects and items of human existence that you cannot get around. One, our sociality. Two, our ability to take in and differentiate information from the environment. That's not specific to human beings. That's something that's ubiquitous amongst all creatures that have to act on the world, because the fundamental disposition of all life is to act in the world in accordance to its values, or in accordance with its motivations, or motivational factors that make it act. You have to figure out how to get food. You have to figure out how to seduce or bring to you a mate. You have to figure out how to manipulate the environment in order for it to produce the effects that you would like for your advancement, or for your ability to not die, essentially. And it's the fact that you know that this has to be the case because people cannot be completely socially dependent. It's honestly completely annoying to me that people will willingly accept that we as evolved things must have an innate social nature, but we as evolved things don't have a general palate for our ability to reason about things in the world from the base level assumptions of phenomenon. And I suppose, actually excuse that line, but from the standpoint of if we make it such that we have to, or if we consider it such that we have to be in the world and we have to notice patterns and trends and act on those patterns and trends in order for us to be successful, then you can't deny, if you just consider that, then you can't deny that there has to be some mechanism which selects for that factor, and there has to be aspects of cognition and our genetic makeup that make it such that there are things that make it more in your favor to have those capacities, and there's things that will make it less in your favor to have those capacities. You can't say that they're all genetic and innate, but to say that none of it's genetic, none of it's innate, or that it doesn't exist, I would spin it to you like this. Why is it such that we would need the capacity for general intelligence beyond just what it is, beyond the demands that the world puts on us, in the sense that it can kill us and will kill us? We're so removed from the actual Pleistocene landscape that we evolved on, and we're so far removed in culture in terms of the actual consistent pressures that we experience from the world, such that we don't realize the complete totality, veracity, and impartiality of nature. So this may fall deaf on the 21st century individual because it's not immediate to their local understanding or their local experience in the world. But you don't have to trust me. You can go and look at any other animal within nature and realize how harsh existence is for it. And it's not because mankind, as many I suppose misanthropists and defenders of nature would like to think, it's not because mankind suddenly decided to create some infrastructure in the world and establish cities and things. Now certainly we've had our issues of how we negatively affect the environment, but we came up with the technologies and advancements and developments of culture because nature will kill us, and it won't ever stop in terms of its dominance on life and the world. That is where the term natural selection, that's why we have the term natural selection, because nature selects, and its judicious process is saying this one will live and this one will die. And it's the fact that we need something to stand against us and the brunt of it. And certainly, we're not the only social animal. And animals from at least evolved in several different species decided to collude together to make it such that there was a lower probability of them dying due to predation and other factors within nature. And so that's 1A of the epitome of our existence, what it constitutes to be a human being. But 1B has to be general intelligence, because 1A does not account for all of the potential problems that come with being a social thing. One, the group might be dumb in the sense that the group might not notice something that an individual can notice. Two, the group might the group might kill you is also another problem. If you can't establish things for yourself and you can't reason out in the world to achieve your own individual means, there's not a good chance that you can be completely reliant on the group to do it for you. Also, it's the case that they might not, and it's also the case that the problem of ignorance is ubiquitous. The group may be completely benign, but you really need to figure something out, and you want to talk to somebody within your group about it, but they don't know a damn thing about it because ignorance is ubiquitous. So the only way you're going to be able to figure this thing out that might be imperative to your existence is to be able to get out in the world, look at things, and figure something out. I don't care what you want to call that, but your two factors of your existence are sociality and your ability to figure something out. Now, one would say, and I would ask somebody, how is that saying that you're judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree? Because you're not. Because a human being has programs. It's hardware that we as creatures come with in terms of animating forces that get us out into the world and want to act and receive things from the environment. You can't justifiably accept that that's true and not think that there are those who can operate the system better than others. And if you don't want to make it an evaluative thing, I'll put a simple example that, you can give cognitive batteries to rats, you can give cognitive batteries to monkeys, you can give cognitive batteries to birds, you can give cognitive batteries to octopi, you can give cognitive batteries to a whole host of creatures that will participate with you. With dogs, foxes, wolves, we've seen this with several species. And it's the case that if you took a group of those, if you took and applied cognitive batteries to a population of any species, you will always be able to select out a cluster of traits that sum together to a single factor that determines their ability to get what they want based on what they can read, see, recognize, and act on. That's it. Their ability to figure things out or to problem solve. What would you like to call that cluster? Would you want to say, I'll tell you something, it's not multiplicative. It's not multiplicative. It's not that these things it's not that you couldn't find all of these things to summate to the single cluster, the single item. What would you like to call that? Psychologists have called it general intelligence. But if you're telling me that one, it doesn't exist, or two, that we need to partition it into separate intelligences, I think that you're not paying attention to reality. Because the mere fact is, essentially that a squirrel has to do a few activities in the environment. You know that one of the main aspects of the perceptual landscape of a squirrel, because it's something that can be preyed upon, is its ability to avoid predation. It has to figure out ways not to die. That's basically one of the main features of its job. Just as that's one of the main features of our jobs of existing in the world. It's just more apparent to see how it's the case with the squirrel. Now, if you saw a squirrel in your backyard, if you have squirrels in your region, if you saw that if you have a dog, let's just say you have a dog, and you have a dog, and you see that there's a squirrel in your backyard. If you saw that squirrel, not because there's any prize that could be won in the sense that, maybe your dog has a stash of acorns next to it, or there's something to gain. There's another squirrel or something near the dog, and it's there in heat, and it would like to mate. There are items that would justify the squirrel walking right up or right past that dog and trying to gain or earn something. But if the squirrel was not in the act of gaining or earning something, and it walked right up or right past your dog, and it got eaten, you would think that that's a stupid squirrel. You would legitimately think that that's a stupid squirrel. Or you would think that there's something funny or off about that squirrel. It doesn't quite fit just what it should do. And so if you have, and intuitively, you'll have this expectation or this realization because you've observed squirrels for a long time, and essentially when squirrel sees predator, it should run or it should flee. Because if squirrel doesn't do that, it will get eaten, and it doesn't want to die. Nothing wants to die. An organism's main job is not to die. So if it does its job badly, you think, God, that's stupid. But for some reason, and I'm not saying, don't let any person tell you that I'm saying that that means in just specifically to academic domains, because I'll get to that. I'm not saying it's somebody's performance in an academic domain, but I'm saying that a lot of times the argument is this, that if you took, so with the multiple intelligences thing, if you took somebody with mathematical, logical intelligence and verbal linguistic intelligence and put them in a different environment that's not academia, they would find that they needed different kinds of intelligences to deal with the demands of the environment at hand. But I'd like to spin it to you like this. How about we do this? And I would dare anybody to do this experiment. Like, just do this experiment, or let's have a thought experiment. How about you do this? You say, I'm going to take all the individuals that test highly in logical mathematical intelligence, and I'm going to take all the individuals that test highly in linguistic and verbal intelligence. And if an individual tests highly in both, great. We're going to take the individuals that test highly in one or the other, or both, and we're going to cluster them together, and we're going to put them on a farm. Then we're going to take everybody else. I mean, everybody else. And this is assuming that none of the multiple intelligences have any overlap with one another whatsoever, which researchers have shown that that's not the case. But that's neither here nor there. We're just going to assume they don't have any overlap whatsoever. And we're going to take everybody that's not mathematically or linguistically inclined, and we're going to group them all together in this farm over here. And we're going to let these farms do whatever you're supposed to do on a farm for 10 years. And we'll see who would be more successful. And I'd like to posit you the question. Who do you think is going to be more successful? Who do you think is going to be more successful? Because the things that you do with... So the thing about math, logic, and language is that they're codifications of patterns. Human beings are pattern-seeking and pattern-generating creatures. Our ability to notice patterns, to codify them, and to act on them has legitimately been the overarching, strongest force to our advancement since the dawn of our existence, when we decided to play with some fire and make some tools. I kid you not. And it's the case that, alright, if you legitimately think that the other farm is going to win, I'm going to tell you statistically that's not the case. And you can see that in nations, per se, when you look at GDP per capita and the average of IQ per capita of the country. And I'm telling you, except for certain statistical outliers, such as China and certain countries within the Middle East, because China has no natural resources to speak of, which is why they had to emphasize the development of technology so much in copying the West, and the fact that the many regions within the Middle East happen to have a whole lot of oil, so they can generate a great deal of capital for their nations. Outside of those statistical outliers, or any country that is dominated by a totalitarian regime, because as much as people would like to think that communism doesn't have its pernicious effects, it sure as hell does not make you money. So it's the case that whenever you exclude for those things, and you just look at GDP per capita of each nation, and then look at the average IQ, it is always the case that the nations with the higher IQs, the higher levels of IQ, make more money. Because it's the simple fact of this. Technology, innovation, advancements, and infrastructure make it such that you can get bucks. You don't have it such that people can establish infrastructure. You don't have it such that people can create technology. You don't have it such that you have modern marvels within medicine. You don't have any of those things if you don't have intelligent people who can create those fields, that can create the technology, that can create the practices, establish the infrastructure, have the visions, it's the case that there's about only 2 traits. There's about 3 traits. Alright, well, I'll finish this. You don't have any of it. And you walk around in the modern world and say that something like general intelligence doesn't exist. Yet you, anytime something would go wrong in your city, most cities, if it's not West Virginia, has a team of engineers it can call upon that it enlists that work on the act of the state or work on the half of the federal government to fix its issues. If America didn't have a team of engineers to solve its goddamn problems, we would be worse than Madurai, India. I mean, it's just the case that a lot of the infrastructure and a lot of the benefits we have are due to our capacity for reasoning, the advancements in science, the dominance of IQ in this nation. And I don't know why it's such a touchy... Well, I know why it's a touchy thing. And I'm not ever... I know why it's a touchy issue. But what I'm not saying is that a person's intrinsic value is determined by their ability to process information. That's not what I'm saying. But to say that general intelligence doesn't exist, that intelligence is not valuable, and 3, that geniuses aren't valuable, I mean, Jesus, you're either retarded, resentful, or jealous. That's the only thing, those are the only things that I could, or you're not paying attention, but those are the only reasons I would think that I can come up with that you wouldn't be able to look out into the world and see, you know what, not everybody achieves the same things. Like, it's obvious that there are differences in outcome, and it's not the case that inequality comes down to innate differences in people initially, always, because it's the case that we're living in a time in history where so much of it has played out and activities are long-reaching that you can't really boil things down to just the innate differences in people. But I will tell you this, that if you want to ask what 3 traits would make it such that a person is going to be successful in the Western sphere, it ain't gonna be, you can only find 4 factors that have anything to say about this in a positive light. There are 2 factors that have a negative spin on it. So if you're highly neurotic, that has a negative effect on your ability to be successful. It can, at least statistically. If you're overly agreeable, negative. And if you're overly disagreeable, negative. Overly agreeable, you'll never get what you deserve. And if you're too disagreeable, you'll probably wind up in prison. But the people in the middle make more money than most other people. It's also the case that conscientiousness, IQ, and openness, they're about the only traits that you can find that statistically, when people load higher in those 3 things, they make more money versus the average of the population or most other people. And I'm not saying that money is the only valuable thing, but it's a good proxy for success in the sense of this. If you're making something that people want, they'll pay you for it. If your nation has things that are to be desired, coveted, in the sense of its infrastructure, in the sense of its programs, in the sense of its opportunities, people will pay for it. If it's the case that your medicine is good, people are going to pay for it. You know, you can just look at money as a proxy for value. It's not always the case, because there's people who float horse shit all the time in the market. That's not always the case, but it's a good approximator. And it's the case that if somebody can generate value in the marketplace, typically individuals that generate value in the marketplace statistically have higher IQ, higher levels of conscientiousness, and higher levels of openness. And in our farm situation, it's the case that about the only thing that's going to differentiate the 2 is their IQ and their levels of conscientiousness and openness. I mean, and I'm willing to bet, just because I know from the studies I've looked at, that people who load highly in logical, mathematical, linguistic intelligence, and naturalistic, that's another one, but you can find that you can truncate all those 3 things into the same thing, Anytime somebody loads highly on those three things, they have significant advantages over other individuals in achieving results. Maybe not in achieving results. That's the best way I can say it. Because after certain factors in terms of physical abilities, it's not the case that you can find many factors that select for somebody's ability to be successful in any venture or domain than their levels of conscientiousness, their degree of openness, and their IQ. There's next to nothing else. And so it's the case that what is it that you want to spin to people, and how blind do you want to be to reality? Because look, you can walk out into the world and there are working stoplights, there are power lines, there are power grids that overlay your entire city. There's the fact that you have freeways. There's the fact that you have skyscrapers that you walk to every morning to get to work, or you walk past or something. There's bus systems. Maybe it's not the greatest in your area. There's internet. As much as you like to talk about intelligence doesn't exist, and how much you like to comment on YouTube forums about how asinine people are and ridiculous they are for believing in such a damn construct, what's that fucking construct that even gave you the internet to begin with? Or even has it such as you can type your little letters on the screen so you can feel whatever you need to feel. But obviously, you're not paying attention to the world. This world that you live in, the lap of luxury that you are just so accustomed to, has only been afforded to you because there have been some highly intelligent, conscientious, and creative individuals who have made it such that it could be this way. And it's the case of this. So you really want to understand history? Human history has been a very violent and bloody thing. And we have been social since the goddamn beginning of our existence. If it was the case that our social instincts and our capacities for ethics, morality, and empathy would be the arbitrating factors of our ability to get along, it would have happened aeons ago. Fucking aeons ago. But it has only happened. Violence has decreased only within the last 300 to 400 years because of fucking technology. Because if people don't have to fight for resources, they're most likely not gonna fight. If people don't have to fight for a mate, they're most likely not gonna war. It's the case that when you have technologies, or when you can spread wealth, when you can generate wealth for yourself, you don't need to take over land. I'm black, so I get that there is slavery in this country, and as much as I appreciate abolitionists, the ethical agents, and the moral agents, we did not fucking end slavery because of them. We ended slavery because of technology. And the reason why it would seem absurd, even though it probably will hurt your egalitarian ears, the reason why it would seem absurd nowadays to have a slave is because you can get a fucking machine to do it. Why would you get a person to do that when a machine can do it better and for cheaper? And it's the case that people potentially stand to lose their jobs to AI, because that's a simple fact of the way that the world is moving. Why do people live longer? It's because of technology. Why is anything the way that it is? We have shrinks. You have psychologists and clinics, places you can go. As bad as prescription medicine is, or as harmful as it can be, you can get prescribed something. You want to figure out how to do something, fucking Google it. There's a goddamn Google. You don't have to go to a library. It's the case that the corpus of all the goodness that you receive from the world comes from the fact that there's a trait called general intelligence. And it comes from the fact, and I'm not discrediting conscientiousness or creativity and their absolute paramount necessity to exist for us to be here. It's there. But the fact is that everybody seems to be alright with creativity. Everybody seems to be alright with conscientiousness. But most people don't like the idea that there are people who are more intelligent than others. But they're benefiting from every goddamn thing that those individuals do, or the way, or for the fact that they exist in the world. And it's like, don't be so naive. Do not be so naive. Most of the things that we have it because we figured out how to manipulate and act on the environment in order for it to give us the things that we want. That is all IQ tries to measure. Does it do it perfectly? No. But is it the best thing we have? Yes, so far. But given MRIs, now that we have now that we have MRIs and other means of technology, it's only going to become the case that IQ tests are only going to become better. We may not call them IQ tests, but we're going to have cognitive batteries because they're significant. It's significant. Just spin it. I'll spin it like this. If you look at statistics, I know that people don't necessarily always like statistics, but it's the case that in order to be well, I can't say in order to be an engineer, but what do you think that the average IQ of an engineer, a mathematician, any psychometrician, a chemist, a pharmacist, hell, you name it, anybody in STEM is? The average IQ of most professionals within STEM subjects is, for the conglomeration, 130, for mathematicians and physicists, 140, and for engineers, 135. That's not average. That's not average. Even that's depending on whose scale, at least 3 standard deviations away from the mean. And it's the case that they make it such that you can live in the world in the way that you can. I mean, I'm not discrediting the writers or the artists, because hell, they make the world beautiful. And we need it to look beautiful for us to be able to tolerate it to some degree. But what I am saying is, when it comes to the hard gripping facts of why things look the way that they do, and why we have the lap of luxury that we have. I mean, you could take your dog to a vet. I mean, like, Jesus. The things, I mean, you have free clinics most likely in your town. It's not the case that when you don't have highly intelligent people within a society, that you can have any of those things. You can have any of those things. I mean, you can look at any nation that has the least GDP per capita, and you can look at the overall IQ per capita, and you can find it's a hard-ass way of living. It's a really hard-ass way of living. Because if you can't spot a pattern, if you can't manipulate a trend, if you can't reflect on your own experiences, if you can't be inhibitory to your drives and your predilections, if you can't future sight or be forecasting and long thinking, if you can't manipulate some mathematics, like, you're not going to get very far. It's not going to be the case that you can have societies and be advancing. Like, if it was the case that our existence was just merely predicated on our social capacities, then we'd all be copycats. But that's not the case. That's not the case at all. You know why? Because most of sociality and our social capacities have to deal with our abilities to read, understand, and copy one another. And that's where a lot of learning comes from. And that's where a lot of our disposition to language comes from. But it's not the case that those are the only maxims and drivers to the edifice of our success. It's the case that creativity, which I'll make another video about, creativity and IQ, man, that's it. And conscientiousness, like, that's it. And it's like that's about it. That's all that's really going on. If you don't have some creative individuals, if you don't have some smart creative individuals that will work hard, you will not get anywhere. And it's better to have more of them than not. I mean, it just really is. And it's the case that they're not any more inherently valuable than another person, but it's the case that you should want some geniuses in society, and if you want to think that they don't exist, or they're not all that different from another person, man, you're delusional. And it's not the case that these differences have to make it such that there are irreconcilable differences or irreducible differences in people to such an extent that we can't get along and cooperate and be friends with one another. But hell, it's certainly the case that, man, if you will not wake up to the world that if you will not wake up to the fact that cognitive ability dictates so much of what goes on in the world, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do for you. But there are multiple levels of analyses at which you could look at it to realize that, look, your IQ may not determine who you are, and it certainly is not the biggest defining feature of what you are, but it's significant and it's not going anywhere. Or at least general intelligence. It's significant and it's not going anywhere. Not going anywhere at all. And all other attempts to explain it away or to spell it away are, I mean, like, it's not the case that heresy ever exists in science, because it's not as if we should not throw out the concept of general intelligence the minute we get good enough evidence to do so. But I'm telling you, there is no good evidence that general intelligence does not exist. There is good evidence that there are problems with IQ tests. There's good evidence that there may be some biases with certain scales. But there is no good evidence whatsoever that there is not a such thing as general intelligence. And there is absolutely no damn evidence that it does not influence how cultures and people exist. There is none of that whatsoever. And people might frown over statistics. Well, I'll spin it to you this way. If you don't want, in order for somebody not to be a negative statistic, they need to load highly in other statistics. If you don't want somebody to be another number or another item, then they should be exceptional in a few other statistical categories. Then they won't just be a statistic. But what those categories might be, you might want to ask. Well, if somebody's very open, somebody's very conscientious, and somebody's highly intelligent, I promise you, they won't be another statistic. Or at the very least, they'll only be a part of the group of the positive statistics in correlation with growth of finance, success, or whatever it is you want to attribute. But it's the case that, yeah, it's annoying. Okay, and so that was my video on cognitive ability. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you found it at least informative, interesting, and if you found it offensive, I'm glad. So, that's it, and have a good night.